What are you doing? That doesn't go in there.
It does. Who are you? William Rittenhouse?
Who?
He created the first recycling center in the 17th century. I thought you would know that since you're the world's authority now, foremost on recycling, apparently.
And who are you, Baron von Schwartenmouth? FYI, he created, shut up. See this? It's shiny. You can't recycle shiny things.
That's funny. This brochure from the city that's shiny and recyclable says you can't.
Well, Smarty Pants, what's your brochure say about recycling half a lasagna? Just because your food tastes like cardboard doesn't mean it's cardboard.
It's in a cardboard container.
So, empty the food, recycle the container. And look at these. Half of these water bottles are still half full. You're supposed to take the tops off, empty it out, and then recycle.
While the lasagna's in a cardboard container and your beer bottles in there, I don't see them half full. You make sure they're completely empty before you get rid of them.
Well, that's a baby food jar. What have you been feeding the baby?
Baby food. Baby food. Those are recyclable?
What's your brochure say? Let's see. Oh, it says glass bottles and jars, plastic food and beverage containers, number 1 through 7, are all recyclable. So I guess that covers pretty much everything you could put food in.
Well, I see one problem.
What?
In here. They're all shiny. That blows away your super scientific shininess principle you have.
You got me. But I'll tell you what, I'm smart enough to know this lasagna is still edible.
Got a lot of garbage over there. Do you need any help?
No, I got it. I'm fine. They'll figure it out.
Well, I'm not sure they will. You see, an automated truck comes and picks up the garbage cans and takes the refuse to the landfill. Then a separate truck comes and picks up these large bulk items such as the carpet and lumber. And then another truck comes and picks up the recycling and takes it to the recycling center. If you're not organized, they can't pick them up.
What? That's ridiculous. It's all garbage. It ends up in the same place. Why does it have to be so complicated?
Well, it's not really that complicated. There's just a few simple rules to help you stay better organized and help see that stuff goes where it's supposed to go. For instance, these bags on top of the can, if you've got things that won't fit into your can, you can still bag them up and put them on the curb lawn for the bulk truck to pick up. Just make sure you leave enough space between the cans so that the automated truck can pick it up.
I guess that's not that complicated. Plus, it won't be all over my yard from the wind.
Yeah. Next, that carpet does not belong in the recycling bin. It's not recyclable.
What? Are you sure? It looks recyclable.
Think of it this way. Things that are recyclable can be reused, such as cans and bottles that could be melted down and used again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, that carpet is just nothing but rotten fabric and bad glue. Would you reuse it?
No, my husband and my dog made sure of that. He's a sloppy eater.
Which one?
Exactly.
Anyway, that carpet, that should be cut and tied into manageable 4-foot bundles, like that lumber too. And then just simply set it on the curb lawn for the bulk truck to pick up. Look, if you have any questions, just call the sanitation department and ask them, or go to the City of Elyria website.
Thank you so much for coming. When you see the weather these days, you just never know, and I wasn't sure how determined everybody was going to be to get here, but I'm so heartened by this turnout this morning because I think it demonstrates that we have a lot of caring people who want to be in a position to contribute to a more positive future for our community. So again, thank you so much for bringing the cold here. There's plenty of coffee back there. If you're looking for restrooms, if you go down here and around the corner, you'll find one. And there's some on each floor as well around the corner. So just FYI. You're here today. Some of you are here for the first time. Others, this is the second session. But the city of Elyria wanted to do something a little bit different. So we applied for a Transportation for Livable Communities grant. And we wanted the focus to be data-driven because we want to make decisions to revitalize our business districts. And when we say that, we're talking about our commercial business districts, downtown, Cleveland Street, and the Midway area. And we've had redevelopment plans before for those areas, but they haven't been driven by a market analysis. And so the difference between this process and others is we have two partners as part of this project. We're able to pay for this. There's no city funds, or the money is being paid for by a federal grant, and a small local match. There's some foundation money and a small amount of local money in this. But in all, it's $93,000. And our two partners, one is Street Sense out of Bethesda, Maryland. And those are our market analysts. They are experts who provide this service across the nation. And you met with them the first time, along with the Cleveland Urban Design Initiative and Terry Schwartz, who's here today. In the first session, you heard a little bit from both. The first session being sort of an airplane overview of some of their thoughts about where Elyria and Lorain County fit into the larger market. And then they went back and did a more comprehensive market analysis. And you're going to hear just a little bit from that today because Street Sense are coming back in March. And I really hope that you'll come back for that session because you're going to get sort of a snapshot overview today very briefly of that market analysis. But when they come back in March, they're going to be coming back with specific recommendations based on that analysis. Today, the focus is going to be more on, giving you sort of an idea of where that went without a lot of detail and without the recommendations, but seeing where the infrastructure recommendations fit into that. How, in fact, can Elyria better connect our business districts and to have them complement one another. So this is the second meeting of 3. The third one will be scheduled in mid-March, and you'll be getting a notice about that shortly. But we're happy with the way things are going. So far, we've had 158 people provide input to this process. And when we're all done, we will have a redevelopment plan for our business districts in Elyria that's based on data that will show us where we have realistic expectations. What we want to do is, yes, we want to raise the bar, but we want to do it in a realistic way. We need to know exactly what our opportunities are, where our strengths, where our weaknesses, where are the gaps, and what we can do based on what we know about different factors and different markets surrounding us, where we really can be successful. And that's the difference between this process now and the previous processes. So I ask for your patience. You're not going to get all the information you want today, but this is certainly a very important step in coming up with a holistic plan that has both of those parts to it. We have with us today again Terry Schwartz. She is the Executive Director of the Cleveland Urban Design Initiative, and she was very instrumental in helping us find Street Sense, and she is one of the premier planners in Greater Cleveland. You've probably seen her work illustrated in the Plain Dealer and in other publications, Cranes, etc., because she's got a wonderful track record of helping to revitalize business districts. So we're very fortunate that Terry was willing and able to join us. She went through a very competitive RFP process to get this job, and she has worked in the city of Elyria previously, so she had the benefit of having some history with us. So at this point, I will turn it over to Terry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate that. And it's wonderful to see all of you here today. Let's start with the agenda for today. We didn't print one, just in the desire to save paper. So the mayor gave us a very thorough overview. This is exactly what we're going to be doing today, is focusing on the infrastructure part of the work. It is both a transportation and business redevelopment plan. So at the first meeting, the emphasis was primarily on the market analysis and the business redevelopment. Today, we're going to talk about transportation infrastructure. And when we say transportation, we don't just mean cars. We mean bicycles and pedestrians and transit, really all of the ways that people can get around in the community. So we're going to talk about connectivity, infrastructure, particularly from the perspective of how it can enhance the business prospects, the market here in Elyria's 3 commercial districts. So the way that we'll organize the meeting today is that we'll start by a really brief recap of the last meeting. So I know some of you weren't here. It was also back in November. So we'll just kind of touch on some of the highlights of the November meeting. Then I'll provide an overview of the market analysis. As the mayor mentioned, our market consultants will be back in March to more thoroughly review the market analysis and also talk about ways of moving forward from that analysis. And then the bulk of the meeting today will be what you see as item 4 on the agenda. That is talking about connections, development opportunities, and infrastructure enhancements in the 3 focus areas. At that point, we can all have a question and answer kind of discussion together if you have questions that kind of pertain to the overall plan. We'll also, in number 5, we'll stay at the 3 tables in the front. So if you have particular questions, insights, information you'd like to share with us about Cleveland Street, about downtown, or about Midway, the 3 tables up front, we can cluster around and have conversations there. You'll also see at the tables there's a form. It's not mandatory. It's not a test. If you, during the presentation, have some questions, concerns, some things you really want to talk about, you can feel free to note it down for us, or kind of raise the question at that point, or like I said, we'll have some conversation at the end. So following the discussion groups, really the next steps in this is that the economic development strategy, the input, will happen at the March meetings. And like this meeting and the last one, there'll be a morning meeting and an evening meeting so we can capture as many people as possible. But at that last meeting, it's where we bring it together. And the first meeting was about market, the second meeting is about physical improvements. The third meeting, we put those 2 things together and talk about an implementation strategy. Because really, I mean, all of the good ideas that we can come up with together are only as important as the things that can actually be implemented and made happen in the community. So with that, I'll start here with the recap of the last meeting. Heather Arnold and Abby Ferretti from Street Sense and PES really came to kind of outline the approach to the business redevelopment plan. And what they're doing, they interviewed a lot of people, probably many of you were interviewed. What they're trying to understand is the capacity, the potential, the strength of the real estate markets here in Elyria. That's residential, that's the office market, that's the commercial and retail market, to really understand kind of what's happening now and where the growth opportunities exist. Really seeing what Elyria's competitive advantage is relative to other places in the region, what's the special niche that Elyria can fill, and then also understanding the gap between private sector development and what the public sector is going to need to step in and do. And they were very clear, and I just want to reiterate it as well. When we talk about public sector participation, it doesn't always mean money. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it means federal dollars and transportation improvements that make things like the hotel up at Midway Mall possible. But it isn't just that. It's also policy and zoning, things that need to happen in order to maximize the potential for private sector investment. And then the final part's really important. It's about what's the story of Elyria, how is the image and the market and the development potential of this community communicated more broadly beyond city borders so that the businesses and the investments that you want to see happen here begin to really kind of build and you get to the critical mass toward the business regeneration. So just to sort of reiterate, the 3 areas we're looking at really are downtown, Cleveland Street, and the Mall District. The important thing that came out of the initial meetings was that downtown is really the thing that we have to focus on. It's important that all 3 districts work. and that they complement each other so that the mall isn't competing with downtown, isn't competing with Cleveland Street, but that we recognize all three as separate and important districts. But the downtown, in a lot of ways, it's where it's at because that is Elyria's story. That is the part of the community that is, kind of expressed beyond your borders. And if downtown is working well, the other two districts will follow suit. So this is the point in terms of the market study of where we're trying to get to, is where supply and demand come together. Having too much supply, kind of creates weakness in the market. Having too much demand means people here are going elsewhere to have their needs met, whether it's retail or housing or office and business development space. So really finding that point of equilibrium, which is always changing, but making sure that the development capacity here is aligned with what the market demand suggests. So where things are going in terms of the plan is that looking at the market potential to drive the physical infrastructure investments is key. There's no point doing a lot of public realm enhancements if it isn't aligned with a market outcome. That some news will be good, but not all. I mean, the beginning, and I'll talk about this briefly in the recap of the market analysis. As you know, I mean, the market isn't very strong. It isn't super strong in some sectors. Retail, for instance, not just in Elyria, but throughout the region, is pretty oversaturated. We have more retail as a region than we have people to shop at the retail. So the market isn't as strong as we would like in order to be able to attract some of the kind of businesses that we might want to see downtown at the malls. Cleveland Street's pretty solid, but kind of at the mall and downtown, there's certainly, kind of a need and a desire to have more market strength. So the market analysis is really a snapshot in time of today. Just because it's that today doesn't mean it will be that forever. And so the market, the development, economic development plan that's going to be part of the March meeting will talk about how you take where the market is today and move it toward where you want it to be. And then just the need for, kind of consensus and collaboration in order to take the recommendations and the implementation plan and move it forward. So some of the things that we are looking at on the physical side of it are where are the development opportunities in the city so that if you are going to make infrastructure investments, roadway improvements, intersection investments, that you would target them in ways that would maximize the potential of these development areas. Also important is to connect people to the green resources in the community. This is a very rich community in terms of green space and public space. The beautiful park system, which tend to be kind of separate, a collection of jewels rather than a network of green. And so are there ways through existing roadways, but also proposed greenways and bike connections, particularly coming out of the metro parks, that we can better link the green space system within the community? And then also kind of looking at what's been done recently in terms of upgrades and improvements, what's on the horizon in terms of things that are going to be invested in already so that we can build on those investments. And then lastly, the thing we talked about at the last meeting were these downtown job centers, the importance of where people are working in downtown and how we can better connect them. So that, kind of the large number of employees who do come into the downtown area every day can be connected perhaps better to businesses and amenities so that the whole thing begins to work more effectively. So out of that last meeting, we came up with a series of goals and strategies that we want to focus on for this work. And I know this is kind of hard to read, so I'll just kind of summarize it briefly. Is like finding the ways that we can make sure that the development is complementary in the three districts so that, rather than three separate places, they're really three commercial districts that benefit and enhance each other. Really looking at gateways and access so that when you come into Elyria and also connect between the different nodes of retail activity and commercial development, that sort of sense of being part of the broader Elyria community is very clear. Seeing if there are ways to really enhance and highlight some of the strong things that are here. Because everyone who lives in Elyria knows about the resources that are here, but when you're trying to attract an outside market, really showcasing, spotlighting, highlighting some of those assets, whether it's the historic architecture of downtown or the beautiful green space and waterfalls, how can we make sure that that the story of Elyria is really being told to best advantage? And then what are the ways we can leverage certain, kind of things already underway? For instance, the investments in infrastructure up in the Midway Mall District. How can we leverage that to get the maximum amount of development impact from the community? So those are the four major goals. And really on the connectivity side, we're looking at connecting to parks and also connecting people to downtown. Legibility really refers to people understanding. For instance, we've heard a lot about concerns about parking. It isn't necessarily a shortage of parking in Elyria that's the problem. It's just that people don't see it and aren't understanding kind of where it is. So, people think we need more parking. What we really need is better legibility, better connections to the parking. And also really access to those downtown destinations. And then lastly, on the development and programming strategy, really understanding what's the right mix between development, retail development, residential development. How do we get the right blend of uses in order to get the maximum impact for the city? Okay. Summary of the market analysis. I'll tell you that I'm not part of the market analysis team, but I've spent many hours on the phone with the market analysis team. As the mayor mentioned, they're based in Bethesda, Maryland and Washington, D.C. And so what the residential market is telling us is that, of course, as you know, in Elyria, single-family homes are the biggest piece of the residential market. And there's a lot of single-family homes. And it doesn't, the market doesn't suggest that there's a need to be constructing additional single-family homes. However, understanding that there are two really key demographic groups that we want to both attract and retain in Elyria. One are younger households, the millennial population that everyone talks about. How do we attract and retain those younger households in the community, given the fact that the kind of housing they're looking for is different than the traditional single-family house? And then also older people, empty nesters, who may want to be moving out of their traditional single-family house into what we say here is an amenity-rich environment. Downtown Elyria is a classic kind of architectural environment, a walkable place with a lot of historic architecture and access to, kind of unique resources that make for a really good place to live. It's happening in a lot of other communities, and can we capture some of that market here? The other thing that the residential market really showed pretty strongly as well, single-family owner-occupied homes, kind of are predominant, and that market is pretty saturated here in Elyria. That rental housing, that there's not very much of it relative to the overall. So there may be some latent demand for more rental housing and that kind of development in the community. On the office side, one of the kind of key opportunities here is that the office space, in the community is downtown and at on Cleveland Street is affordable, and so that gives you a competitive advantage, particularly for startup businesses that may be looking for space. Also, downtown is a beautiful setting, an authentic setting for office development. There are lots of businesses that would look for this kind of setting as a place to create their and locate their business. And then out particularly at the Midway Mall District, there's latent demand for what's referred to as sort of office warehouse flex space. It's a low sort of single-story development that creates the flexibility to have both, kind of traditional offices, but also having, manufacturing, particularly distribution, kind of in a flexible footprint. And so what the market study showed was there's need for about 30,000 square feet, which isn't huge. That's not a lot. That's one good-sized building. But if if an office flex space development were successful, it would lead to more of the same. And we'll show you that when we get to looking at Midway Mall. The obstacles are that, the Lorain County statistics, the statistics for the county suggest negative absorption. All that means is that there is, kind of more space available at the county-wide level than there's demand for it. But if there's a way to create something special, a unique niche for Elyria, that we'd be able to capture some of the office demand here. And then there's also this kind of excess supply of obsolete office space, not just in Elyria, but elsewhere in Lorain County. And so having a lot of product at the, kind of low end of the rent spectrum makes it hard for new development to happen because there's just much cheaper space available. But the fact that the community is accessible, it has kind of an authentic architectural environment, and that the where it fits economically in the region is kind of a good midway point. It does show that there's potential here for office development in the community. On the hospitality side, particularly up in the Midway Mall district, there is latent demand that would suggest that at least one additional hotel would be financially viable in the Midway Mall district in the near term. And then in the mid to long term, say 5 to 8 years, a second hotel would be possible. The idea that it's both visible and able to attract business travelers, and also this very strategic location, kind of between these two main interstates, the interstate and the turnpike, makes the location up at Midway Mall very desirable. On the retail side, as I mentioned, there is more supply than there is demand, but really the goal of the market study is to understand what kinds of businesses could be attracted to each district. So your national franchises, the big box stores, really are going to gravitate and will continue to gravitate to the Midway Mall district because of that freeway visibility and access. The downtown's niche is really F&B and GAFO. That means food and beverage. GAFO is general retail, so really anything you would buy in a department store, so be it sporting goods or clothing or just the kind of general retail would be the main kind of businesses to try to attract to downtown Elyria. There already are many of these businesses in downtown, but it doesn't feel like a consolidated cluster because there's a florist and a chocolate shop and a coffee shop, et cetera. And so can we strategically target areas of downtown to get that critical mass and then grow it? And then Cleveland Street is, almost fully occupied. It's very high rate of occupancy. The questions for Cleveland Street is how you deal with business retention, keeping people there, and then having a strategy for, as businesses ultimately leave, attracting new ones to fill those spaces. We're going to do kind of 2 quick case studies just to show you if we get all of these pieces working together, the market side and the physical improvement side, kind of what the outcomes can be. So the first we're going to look at, just really briefly, is Kent, Ohio. Close to our hearts, our Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative is part of Kent State University. And so we've seen downtown Kent transformed over the last few years. Downtown Kent had a very weak business market. I mean, the fact that there are all these students there help, but only during the school year. But it was mostly bars and the things that kind of cater to students. But the $100 million investment in downtown redevelopment in Kent came from beginning with, public investment in transportation infrastructure. So there was a multimodal transportation center created, also improvements made to roadways, to the pedestrian environment, which set the stage for private sector investment. So you can see the numbers here. There was $44 million in transportation and infrastructure investments, and also incentives to, kind of businesses locating in the district. And then $58 million, that leveraged $58 million in private investments. Over 900 jobs were created, generated about $2 million annually in increased tax revenue. And the really most transformative part of this is that there's now about 230,000 square feet more of office, residential, and restaurant uses in the downtown. Made a huge difference. And it all kind of centers around this multimodal transportation center that includes bus, transit, and also parking. And here you see, it's a combination of both the historic architecture and also new construction, probably more new construction than we might see in downtown Elyria, only because downtown Elyria's historic fabric is more extensive and more substantial. But it was, within a period of roughly about 5 years, really a total transformation of downtown Kent. So close to home. Here we'll go to look at one a little further from home. This one's in California. But similarly, it's a redevelopment of a historic downtown core, a downtown that hadn't been kind of successful in terms of retail development, but really, again, sort of starting with the transit and transportation infrastructure, investing, in a transit center, and also encouraging development in a priority development area around transit, ultimately adding 100 units of affordable housing and some mixed-use development, and adding about 700,000 square feet of retail parking and a movie theater. And here you see it. So I just kind of show you these as sort of inspiration that, if we align the transportation recommendations and the market recommendations successfully, that what you already have here in Elyria that is good and strong could be better and stronger. Okay. So This is the fourth item on the agenda. Really, the bulk of the meeting is to talk about what those connections, what those infrastructure and public realm improvements might consist of. We put these out here at this meeting. The second meeting is always my favorite. For a lot of people, it's sort of that pause between the getting to know you and the getting to the implementation and recommendations. But this is the meeting where everything is in flux. We can talk about really what's important to you and what we think might actually work. But I think it's important that we set the stage here. Really, we looked at the thoroughfare plan that was produced here in Elyria recently. It's an excellent study because it really looks at the roadway system in a detailed way. And what it tells us, looking at those findings and also looking at data from NOACA, who's been our partner on this project, is that the existing roadway system has sufficient capacity. That may be, kind of surprising sometimes if you get stuck in traffic in the morning, or if there's a, kind of a tie-up, when you're getting on and off the turnpike. But really, if you look at the roadway network, it's sufficient to serve the demand that you have now, and also to meet the needs even as new development comes in. Maybe not forever, but certainly for the near and midterm, that the roadway system is sufficient to meet the demands of the people who live, work, and visit here. Now, it's important to know, if you look at the thoroughfare plan, streets get graded by traffic engineers, A, B, C, D, and those of us who remember high school kind of, you want the A's and not the D's. But in a transportation context, you don't necessarily want all A's. If you have all A's on all of your streets, it means you have excess capacity. You have more pavement that you need, and it also means the traffic is moving too quickly. Sometimes having a street that's a B or a C, even a D at certain times of a day, is perfectly okay because you want people to slow down. You want to have, enough traffic and transportation, kind of moving through the city so that the businesses, for instance, have enough people seeing them. And so in this process, and it's not uncommon in these TLCI studies, there really don't seem to be any main roads that need to be, widened, any intersections that need to be, kind of enhanced. In a lot of the TLCI projects we've worked on, and also that we've seen other people work on, the recommendations talk about actually reducing capacity. So one recent one, for instance, in Shaker Heights, looked at what we call road diet, making the streets narrower so that the cars, when they get to the central business district, actually slow down, notice the businesses, stop, shop, this sort of thing. It's not about creating traffic jams. Nobody wants that because that's not good for business and that's not good for residents and that's not good for people who work here either. But really figuring out where the balance is between making the traffic flow smoothly and also, kind of maintaining a good environment for living and for development. So it's good news in a lot of ways, is that, kind of with the recent improvements up to 57 near Midway Mall, the city's transportation network, the capacity is actually pretty good. So how can we focus here on making connections work better and also benefiting some of the uses we want to see? The other thing to look at here, because transportation isn't just about cars, this also came from the thoroughfare plan that looks at the overall bike network. Really, particularly if you're hoping to attract some of those younger households, bike transportation is a really big priority for millennials, given the fact that you all are so close to Oberlin, and also because the residential districts could tie so nicely into the downtown and to the park system. You could get an increase both in residents and also in visitors if you're able to kind of put together a cohesive bicycle network so that people know that they can ride their bike into Elyria, experience this quaint downtown, and connect to the beautiful waterfalls and the park system. So between the city and the metro parks, this thoroughfare plan really shows in red, and you can see these, I think we have some of them printed out, and we'll certainly have them available in the next meeting as part of the recommendations, is to really figure out which pieces of this bike network need to be implemented in order to make the connection, make the system work. Okay, so this one is really just kind of reiterating what I said. I know it's probably hard from the back of the room to see, but this shows what the thoroughfare plan says overall in terms of roadway investments. And essentially what it says is that some of the roadways should be classified from the way that they're named. Streets are named as minor arterials, major arterials, collector streets. The thoroughfare plan doesn't recommend changing any streets themselves, but changing some of their classifications, which just impacts the way that funding can be allocated for repairs and improvements. So again, essentially good news is that the overall system is fine. The key recommendations that we're going to focus on in this conversation today revolve around the one-way streets downtown. One-way streets are a really efficient way of moving traffic, just the fastest way. If you make the streets one way, the traffic can flow in and out more rapidly. The problem, though, is that one-way streets are not great for pedestrians and they're not great for business, because even if the posted speed limit is 25 or 35 miles an hour, people always drive faster on one-way streets than the posted speed limit lists. Secondly, with one-way streets, there's less visibility and access for pedestrians. Even with crosswalks, generally speaking, one-way streets create more of a barrier for pedestrian movement. So the thoroughfare plan recommended, and we support the idea, that the downtown streets, and I'll show you this in a second, that are currently one-way would be converted to two-way, and that's Second and Third Street, so that we can get more access to businesses and also enhance the pedestrian environment. The other kind of key piece of the work is really looking at points of entry into the downtown and into the city as a whole. We say this a lot, enhancing a point of entry. What do we mean by that? This is just a kind of quick before and after to show this is at Broad Street heading toward the hospital. So right now, you come in and what you're greeted by is really mostly pavement and hard surface. So even with relatively, kind of modest investments of a more emphatic crosswalk, a little bit of landscaping, what you're doing is sending a message to people that Elyria is a place that cares about walking. The green space system that's so much part of your community doesn't always appear in the business districts along the commercial corridors. So creating a little bit of green links the commercial districts back to that larger natural system. So when we talk about enhancing points of identity, we'll have more of these kind of before and after views, just the kind of investments that could happen at key intersections in order to change the conversation and the identity of the city. So to reinforce again, we're talking about, start with the downtown and focusing on that area. Really, some of the locations kind of where the gateways need to be enhanced. One of the ones that seem particularly important, since we're focusing on downtown and Cleveland Street, is that sort of point, that juncture point between the two of them. So where Bridge Street and Cleveland come together, which is what you see here, there's my dot, right there. That's an intersection. When we talk about that, just kind of getting specific, that's a place where we'd want to put some attention, some investment, so that really understanding that the two districts aren't these two separate different things, but really kind of part of a larger network. Similarly, kind of heading up, kind of toward the mall, even though, how do we get into downtown? How do we get between the mall and the downtown district? Really looking at those kind of corridors that provide the stitches between the districts. Another goal of this work is to really define the space. Downtown and Ely Square is a very defined space. It's a green space surrounded by buildings. Are there other edges and other views so that when you're in the downtown, you're able to experience, kind of both the natural and the historic context of the community? One of the things that we're really pretty fascinated by is the fact that Cascade Park and Ely Square are right next to each other, but that, people don't really experience those two spaces as a whole. So it's one or the other. But the linkage between the two of them is the place where we think with some, kind of focus, some emphasis, we can bring the two pieces together so that the sum actually adds up to something more than the sum of its parts. And then some key stitches, some certain, kind of sections. It'd be wonderful to streetscape every street in the city, but are there some kind of key places that if you put the investment there, it really changes perceptions and changes the experience of the downtown environment? And then how do we really foster a sense of experience, so that coming downtown, instead of experiencing, nice buildings and green spaces here and there, you really get the sense of being in a discrete and unique place. So let's talk specifically. Most of the recommendations, as I mentioned, will focus on downtown because that's kind of the heart of where investment can happen in order to kind of turn the narrative around. And then we'll just talk about Cleveland Street and also Midway Mall. So for downtown, the market study, the recommendations that they suggested is that we should begin to think about clustering retail uses for maximum impact. So if you have, for instance, a restaurant and cafe cluster, it's going to attract more patrons than if you have a restaurant and a cafe and a restaurant over here. But can we, kind of have a targeted strategy to fill in some of the open storefronts in a way that creates this cluster, this environment that you find, in cities? Can we look at upper story residential? You know, in the first meeting, we didn't get a lot of people telling us that they're clamoring for an opportunity to live downtown. But architecturally and from an urban design standpoint, it's a really beautiful setting. And so are there ways, if we have vacant office units on the second story of some of the buildings, that we can have a targeted strategy to convert some of those units for rental? Because like I said, as the market study suggested, you know, kind of the demand for rental housing in the city, and particularly in downtown, is there. We're just not tapping into it yet. And then can we look at the development asset represented by the Historic County Courthouse, which is a beautiful building, critically important to the context of Ely Square, and there's space in it. So are there ways that we could attract other things into it to make that more of an anchor, more of a dynamic building, a more dynamic use in the downtown? So let's start with the downtown retail cluster. If we're going to cluster retail anywhere downtown, I'm sorry this is so dark, it looks great on my screen, but not so much on this one. If we're going to cluster retail downtown anywhere, you know, one of the first places to start would be up here along Broad Street. Why? Well, because the architecture is there, because it is that point of connectivity between Ely Square and Cascade Park, and because there are a number of buildings that are just ripe for new uses. So if we're able to attract the right kinds of businesses to create a little node, a little niche here, it really will be kind of transformative for Ely Square and the downtown as a whole. So this just looks at where there are vacant retail storefronts now along Broad Street. There's quite a few of them. And so if we are able to, you know, kind of really focus on a targeted economic development strategy to bring some businesses in that fill needs and also create an environment here downtown, that would be, you know, kind of impactful. These are buildings that would lend themselves to second-story live workspace. So not eliminating office uses entirely, not converting everything to residential, but maybe having a blend where there's some office use, there's some residential use, and then there's some live workspace, which really there doesn't seem to be much of in Elyria right now. And you know, the market study suggests that there would be demand for that kind of a use. And then looking at new development and potential for, you know, kind of some infill development to really kind of bring this northern end of the square into focus. So the first one, and I'll show you some images of it shortly, is up here on Lake Avenue, just north of Broad Street. You know, there are a couple of big sites that could potentially create an opportunity for mixed-use development. We love the idea of some kind of hospitality/natural lodge use here because the views, as I'm sure you know, from Lake Avenue kind of into Cascade Park are stunning. And that would be a way of kind of connecting the business and the architectural development to the natural environment. The market study says that the market isn't there to do any kind of lodging here, at least not in the short term. The market consultants suggested that we should continue to talk about that if it's desirable to the community to put it into the recommendations, but that would be a long-term objective. But the site's so perfect for people to experience, you know, kind of all that Elyria has to offer right here because you're close enough to the freeway system. You've got, you know, kind of these gorgeous views into the valley, and then the, you know, kind of quick connection into the northern end of downtown. So, I mean, looking at these buildings, really in any city that has architecture like this, the opportunity for residential conversion is there because these are exactly the kind of buildings that attract tenants, that attract people who want to live and work in these uses because the architecture is amazing. The windows would create beautiful light. And so you've got this resource. And so are there ways to really look at some of these buildings as possible residential conversions? Now, on the infrastructure side, what would that take? I mean, the street's pretty nice as it is, but with a couple of, you know, kind of light touch enhancements. Again, more prominent crosswalks, increasing the tree canopy at the street level to really say this is an environment that's both retail and office, but also a place where people, you know, people live. People like to live around green space. And so really with some small infrastructure enhancements, it would create an even stronger setting for residential conversions to some of those upper story units. Again, on Broad Street, opportunities here. Right now, there's fantastic architecture, and then there's holes in between. Those holes are sometimes parking lots, sometimes they're just open lots. So are there ways we can kind of create that edge, create that immersive environment? And really, it does kind of boil down to creating some edges at the, some landscape buffers around the edges of parking lots, which a lot of the parking lots downtown already have, but really could be more consistently applied throughout, reinforcing the crosswalks and adding some landscaping. We'll make all of these slides available to you so that you can see them up close, you know, and not so gray. This is Lorraine Avenue to Lake. You know, one of the things that seems really key for Elyria is some kind of wayfinding system. I mean, there are some signs and connections, but to really have a way to prominently point people toward the park system and toward the parking. I mean, when people say that there isn't parking downtown, it just means they don't know where the parking is. So are there ways to create some signage strategies that link people to the resources and the support services they need? On the issue of development opportunities for the county courthouse, of course, it's the county's courthouse, we just have been looking at case studies of other communities. Typically, when you have surplus real estate in a historic building like this, the process is to first conduct a feasibility analysis to see what kinds of uses would be most financially feasible within these buildings. Especially with the historic building, opportunities for tax credits. Even though the county is a public institution, tax credits can be, you know, kind of sold to private sector partners. It's complicated transaction, but lots of communities have done it. So the models we've looked at have been starting with the feasibility study and then often an RFP, where if there's space available in the building, the RFP is issued to the development community to see who's interested in doing what kinds of development in this building. Since we've been working on this process, people have been telling us different interesting ideas for what could happen in the county courthouse. And ideas are fantastic, but ideas need to connect to, you know, kind of a development objective so that the dollars to make it happen are real. But the important thing is that the county courthouse is what developers refer to as a non-retail anchor. I mean, you know, an anchor in a downtown is often a shop or, you know, kind of a retail business of one kind or another. But the county courthouse provides a non-retail anchor that draws people here, and by expanding the range of uses within it, it could be even stronger as that anchor. So those are the development recommendations. Just kind of briefly, the infrastructure recommendations, you know, from the thoroughfare plan are converting the one-ways to two-way streets, increasing the number of bump outs and crosswalks. There are already bump outs and crosswalks downtown, but can we have more of them to really enhance the pedestrian environment? Downtown wayfinding and gateway features. Pedestrian connection between Ely Square and Cascade Park to really make the connection between those two spaces. Looking at the bridges to see if there are ways that we could reduce the extent to which they serve as barriers. In a way, the bridges, the railroad bridges around downtown enclose the downtown, but it also creates at least a perception, a barrier for pedestrians to you know, kind of move beyond it. So are there treatments we can use to really reduce that barrier? And then for parking, we can discuss this, but I mean, our sense of the parking is that there's actually enough parking, and what we really need to focus on is improving the pedestrian links. You wouldn't mind walking a little bit farther from your parking space if you didn't feel like, you know, you were going to get run over. So improving the pedestrian links between parking and where people want to go. So this map shows in blue 2nd and 3rd Street. Those are the two-way streets, the one-way streets that we'd recommend, again, in conjunction with the thoroughfare plan to move to one-way streets, and to two-way streets. The red shows streets that could be, what we say, road diet reconfigured. Those would be the streets that might have some bump outs to allow for on-street parking and also to kind of narrow the pedestrian crossing a bit. And then edge enhancements here in purple for Broad Street so that you get more of a continuous experience along the street. So closing in here on Ely Square, you can see for 2nd Street and 3rd Street just how the street would be, you know, kind of reconfigured to two-way. There's enough room within the existing right-of-way to convert the street to a two-way street, to allow for on-street parking in some segments of the street, and then again to really up the ante on the pedestrian environment, really kind of putting the pedestrian a little bit more important in the overall transportation ecosystem.
Excuse me, did you say on-street or off-street parking?
There's both, but like in this section here of 3rd Street, even if you go from one way to two, there's room for on-street parking. So the combination of off-street and on-street parking, I think, is the key to making sure people have enough parking, but not too much. So here's kind of what it would look like if the street, or could look like, were converted from a one-way to a two-way street. It would have a more prominent crosswalk. It would give us a little more room to buffer, to create that green buffer along the pedestrian edge, and it would, kind of allow for, traffic to move in both directions. This is at 3rd Street in the courthouse. Again, same strategy, prominent crosswalks, little bump outs at the corners to narrow the crossing for the pedestrians. And then, there's a learning curve, people that have to get used to this transformation, but it would effectively, kind of slow traffic down and increase the exposure of downtown businesses for people passing, kind of through the community. 3rd Street at the at the courthouse, again, shows a little closer. So beyond the one-way to two-way transformation, these asterisks represent places in the downtown area where some wayfinding would be useful to kind of point people toward toward parking and also toward the downtown destinations. And this isn't to say this is what your wayfinding system should be like, but what we're trying to illustrate here is having a consistent, thorough system that says you're in downtown and you're in this kind of special place, and a way of directing people, both, like I said, to some of the key destinations, but also kind of pointing people toward where the parking is so that it jumps out and is readily available. So this Broad Street just kind of brings it all together. This is the street today, and the potential for redevelopment in this area. Again, kind of crosswalks, landscaping, bump outs, putting it all together. So in a lot of ways, what we're doing in this work is taking the recommendations from the thoroughfare plan and illustrating them. So the thoroughfare plan suggested, many of these suggestions, so we just put it into an image so you could see what that would actually mean in the community. On the bridge side, there's a certain charm to the way that the bridges enclose the downtown. When we were here maybe 8 years ago working on a planning initiative, we talked a lot about transforming the bridges, and I think one of the things that's a barrier to this happening is that it's hard to do. The railroads aren't necessarily the easiest partners to work with because they have their own objectives of moving the trains through the community. But there are lots of examples around the country of people who have transformed the undersides of bridges. The least expensive way to do it is with paint. Finding some imagery, these are examples from elsewhere, of adding color so that it feels like less of a barrier, less of a dark cave that you're going under. The trouble with paint, of course, is that there's the cost of doing it, but then there's the ongoing maintenance. And when paint starts to peel, unless you have the capacity to keep it up, the perception of peeling paint is worse than no paint at all. But the low-cost way, transforming the underpasses would be through some system. Paint, assuming we have a way to maintain it. More costly, but ultimately more impactful would be light. This is a beautiful project in Birmingham, Alabama, that was paid for in part with local funds, in part with federal transportation funds, and in part with funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. So rather than a barrier in Birmingham, I've got millions of pictures of this, this is actually a destination. People kind of come to see this installation because it's really pretty beautiful. This one's in Brooklyn. An artist designed this project to kind of create this light experience under a very dark underpass. So what the response for Elyria is really kind of to be determined. But we just show you these because to show that there is this this opportunity and that there are funding sources out there, that this wouldn't totally have to be kind of on the city to make this happen. Okay, so one more. This is again kind of moving from Ely Square north to Cascade Park. Can we point people toward it? Are there ways of really kind of landscaping this this section and creating just a kind of a unique part of the downtown that connects people from the historic architectural core to the natural space? Taking it one step further, and this is a very long-term kind of ambitious idea, but, would we even consider making this section pedestrian only so that you get that kind of dialogue happening across the street between the businesses? The equivalent is like East 4th Street in downtown Cleveland. It creates a pretty unique little setting here that makes that linkage to Cascade Park all the better. That's this section here that I just showed you from Broad Street up Kerstetter. The other piece of it is the linkage between, is the green space linkage that we're showing here in red between the East Falls Riverwalk and the West Falls Trail. It's the missing link, there I am, this piece. So you've got this little kind of beautiful green connection and this one up here. So is there a way to kind of extend it and connect the two? So that ultimately you could get from the civic core, the heart of Elyria, coming through here up Kerstetter Way, whether it's maintained for vehicular traffic or turned into just a little pedestrian segment, and then kind of linking into the larger system of Cascade Park. They really are just minutes away, so by enhancing the connection, you could really bring those pieces together. And then I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the opportunities for development further up on Lake Avenue. So this is Lake Avenue coming up here, just north of Broad Street. And so because Cascade Park, kind of wends its way through, and there's some, potential development parcels here. When the market is ready, this would be, kind of a potential site for mixed-use development that would, kind of anchor downtown. Here's Ely Square. Here's that connection of Kerstetter. So, it would really kind of bring the whole thing together. You'd have the downtown kind of core that's residential and retail and office, then this link to the natural system and having some new development that happens here. Some other options, moving a little further, kind of up lake in order to see, again, find ways to create visibility and development on the edge of Cascade Park.
Some of us are losing your voice.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll stand back over here. The last thing for the downtown is really this question of downtown parking. And we're really interested in talking with you about when you come downtown, if you have problems parking at certain times of the day in certain parts of the downtown. We know the county, has issues, particularly in the mornings when so many people come to downtown to take advantage of the court time and all of the things that are happening in the mornings here. But we just need to understand if there really is a parking shortage, where it is, because when we look at this map, everything in black on this map is parking. So it doesn't look on the face of it. It's not a numbers issue, I'm saying. I mean, there's sufficient number of parking downtown. It's just a question of connectivity, of whether the parking is in the places where it needs to be and whether people feel comfortable walking from where they park to where they are going. So, but I mean, that's a lot of parking. So really, that's why for a large part we focused on, kind of the pedestrian linkages, the bump outs, the crosswalks, so that the parking lots where they are can feel, not so far away from the destinations. And here's just some examples, some, kind of really nicely done with green space and edges, some that are more open. So if there's a more consistent way of treating the edges of parking lots, I think it could bring the downtown district together. So, change. Just very kind of quickly to touch on Cleveland Street here. The thing that came out of the market study in terms of development is that Cleveland Street is an automobile-oriented corridor, and it should stay that way, that we should respect that. In our business, we like to pedestrianize everything because we like pedestrians. And it's not to say that, pedestrians should feel unsafe or endangered at Cleveland Street, but to recognize that Cleveland Street developed as a place that's very convenient to get to by cars, and the whole collection of businesses that are located on Cleveland Street really rely on the fact that it's easy to get in, easy to get out, the parking's right in front. So keeping the corridor oriented toward vehicles while still accommodating some pedestrian movement, but seeing if there's a way that aesthetically we can kind of help tie it together, because what people have told us thus far is that Cleveland Street is convenient, Cleveland Street is occupied, but a lot of parts of Cleveland Street is kind of ugly. So are there ways we can change the image of Cleveland Street, particularly because of point 2, that while there are high occupancy levels now, the city needs to be prepared for when new business will need to be recruited to fill businesses as vacancies occur. So here's Cleveland Street. There's lots of parking. One of the recommendations from the thoroughfare study was to consolidate some of the parking lots so that there are fewer curb cuts. That's a good idea. Finding ways, and it's just a series of conversations between business owners and building owners along Cleveland Street, and finding those opportunities where many small parking lots could be consolidated into larger ones. Because when you get to larger parking lots, then it's easier to do edge treatments. It's easier to create a nice street edge along the corridor. The other thing that came out of Cleveland Street and the thoroughfare study was that right now it's a 4-lane street. The thoroughfare study recommended turning it into a 3-lane street. That's 1 lane in each direction and a turning lane in the middle, which again makes a lot of sense. Even though it would reduce the number of lanes, it probably would actually improve the traffic flow. So the infrastructure recommendations, as I said, fewer curb cuts, consolidating parking where you can, converting the 4-lane road to a 3-lane road with that center turning lane. Crosswalks connect where they need to be. So there's some clusters of businesses that I'll show you in a second where you may park once and walk, but for a lot of them, people do drive from one to the other. So finding the kind of key places where a few crosswalks would make the area come together. For instance, out near Bendex, where you've got a lot of employees who would, you know, maybe cross the street and go somewhere if it was a little easier to do. Tree segments wherever we can fit them, because honestly, when you're trying to fix the appearance of a street, trees is your first line of defense. It's the easiest and most effective way of creating a different appearance. Some signage guidelines. I know there's already design guidelines in place, but creating some guidelines that are not so restrictive that people are opposed to them, but enough of a guideline so that as new businesses come in, that you get more of a coordinated appearance. And then streetscape, particularly in that place where Cleveland and Bridge come together, because that's the link between Cleveland and downtown. So parking lot edges, you know, kind of particularly in this section of Cleveland Street, there's not a lot of edge treatment. This is expensive. We're just kind of showing, you know, kind of what a really strong statement about the pedestrian and the appearance of the street might be. So creating a brick wall, creating a little bit of an edge to the parking lot so that the sidewalk is clearly distinct from the parking. And where we can, I mean, the nice thing about going from 4 lanes to 3 is that we could also bump the curbs out a little bit to create a little bit more of a tree lawn to buffer the pedestrians and also install trees where there's room. How it would look at the street level is this. Again, this is one that you probably want to look at a little more up close, but this is the current 4 lanes, and this is moving it to 3. Again, it allows a little bit more room in the tree lawn so that we can get trees in more areas along the street. So kind of before and after. We're showing this kind of art element as just a suggestion of how, you know, in segments of the street there could be more of an identity for Cleveland Street. But the key points, though, again, are putting trees where you can fit them, creating a little buffer between the pedestrian and the street, so if people do choose to walk along Cleveland Street, they feel safe, extending and rebuilding the curb so that the 3-lane street, instead of the 4-lane street, really has a little bit tighter cross-section. So in this map, we're showing some of the places where there are already pedestrian crossings. Those are the dark ones. The existing pedestrian crossings could be improved. The pink ones are the lighter ones. These are places where, you know, a new pedestrian crossing might be desirable. Recognizing with the speed of traffic on Cleveland Street that any pedestrian crossing would have to be at least, you know, kind of a blinking intersection, if not a signal. This connection here where Bridge Street and Cleveland come together. Sorry, there it is. You know, Bridge Street comes up here and Cleveland Street bends. So are there ways that we can really particularly look at that intersection so that, again, it feels like more of a gateway, more of an intersection? So what we're suggesting is creating a small median, because there's an awful lot of pavement at this main intersection. Can we create a little bit of green space here so it creates a gateway between the two districts, adding some trees along the edge and kind of helping people to make the turn. Also putting the crosswalks in so that at least at this kind of core location, pedestrian movement could be more easily accommodated. So here's the street now. You see the point about that's a lot of pavement. This is what you face as you're coming down Bridge Street, kind of bending off into Cleveland. So this is what we're suggesting, you know, kind of enhanced streetscape on the tree lawn side, being able to kind of turn the traffic through and just to kind of create a more appealing gateway and also a more comfortable environment for pedestrians. Here's Cleveland at Olive, where you have a lot of retail uses. This is one of those areas where conceivably somebody might park and walk from business to business rather than drive from business to business because there are a lot of uses all together. There's a convenient mart and a pizza parlor and dog grooming, a couple of salons and this sort of thing. So this might be an area where you could invest in a little bit more of a landscape and crosswalk environment. Am I going backward? I think I saw these ones before. Okay, then, you know, kind of here, looking at the edge of the district where Cleveland Street crosses with JFK. In this particular area, we're showing kind of all the recommendations of Cleveland Street being narrowed, enhanced crosswalks so that this connection, which already exists, could be a little safer and more prominent. New trees, new crosswalks on the side streets, continuous trees, and then bump outs here at the intersection just in order to make the pedestrian connections work. Lastly, we're showing here, this is where Bendix is located. They've got a giant kind of space in front of their building. So are there ways that we could create an enhanced experience? We know that there are questions about whether Bendix is going to remain or not, but whether Bendix stays or whether the city needs to attract a new business or businesses to that space, enhancing this place is kind of key to making this asset productive, either for its current occupants or for whoever might choose to locate there. So really just kind of creating a green setting so that the building and the business in it has more presence. Creating some pedestrian amenities here at the edge of the property to link the employees in the building to the businesses on the street. And then here you see it in section where it is now. I mean, it really comes down to additional landscaping and also, just sort of an enhanced tree lawn pedestrian zone. Like that. So, I mean, right now, I mean, it's fine the way it sits, but could we really create an identity and established presence either for Bendix, to be in this location? And then kind of coming to the edge of the district, even though this underpass under 80 is in North Ridgeville, are there ways to, kind of light this one up too? Only because this is a really key gateway that you're passing from one community into another. So looking kind of fully at that segment of Cleveland Street from the underpass all the way to JFK so that we could have, kind of a continuous experience there for Cleveland Street. And then the question of signage. I mean, there's a lot of different signage. Signs get added as businesses come, so understanding kind of the level of regulation that you want to have in the community so that as new businesses come in, they're really kind of contributing to the overall retail picture. Lastly, because I know this has been going on for a bit, this is the last part, is about with Midway Mall. And basically what's happening with Midway Mall, the market study suggested a couple of things. That there's demand for some residential housing, that if residential housing were developed there, that there would be a market for it, particularly on the sites at the Midway Mall district that abut the metro parks, because of the proximity to that green space and also the convenience of being close to the interstate system, close to the airport. Rental housing there might work quite well. As I mentioned before, industrial office flex space, and then on the hospitality side, one new hotel, there's demand for it now, and maybe one additional hotel in 5 to 8 years. And then lastly, the point of, kind of given the fact that there's less and less retail, kind of in the Midway Mall district, are there ways we can treat those large pavement, those sheets of asphalt, the parking lots, as a way of responding to reduced demand? So can we green up the edges to create a better setting in the area, reduce the pavement because that has a positive effect on your storm sewer system, and just kind of greening up the edges? So Midway Mall today, the market study suggests sort of 3 possible scenarios for the future of the mall. One is it'll remain in its current condition. Kind of works, kind of doesn't. I mean, there are businesses there that people frequent, but it's not like fully functioning as a mall as it did in its heyday. So it may stay in its current state for a while. There's a possibility of a partial redevelopment. We've seen this happen in other malls around the state and around the country, where some of the, kind of the buildings are removed, and what remains is then reconfigured in response to having, kind of reduced market demand. And then the third option is that it could eventually get sold and be completely redeveloped, where the current facility would be torn down and the site would be fully redeveloped. The one thing that the market study makes really clear is because of this location, its visibility and sandwiched between the two, kind of the turnpike and the highway, that it's always going to be a desirable place for development. It's just a question of what that development will be. So we didn't illustrate kind of staying as it is because you can visit the mall and that's staying as it is. What we're showing here in this drawing is that idea of partial redevelopment. Residential here in yellow along the edge of the Midway Mall district that would have the views and the proximity to the green space system, but still the linkages to the turnpike and the highway. These red buildings represent that office industrial flex space. The market study suggests there's demand for one. Maybe we'll call it that one. But once you have one, more demand, more development is likely to follow suit. So we're showing a few of them because just drawing one seemed too little. And then this is showing, ways that the existing mall building, that some of the retail square footage within it could be removed so that it opens up new connections through the mall site itself so that people living here would be, kind of more connected on through. If the mall is completely redeveloped, really that opens up a world of possibilities, but some of the recommendations from the market study that we just wanted to share with you here is that the new development would likely have less retail square footage, that it is an opportunity to kind of clarify the street grid, which we're doing a little bit of here in this sort of partial redevelopment. But is there a way to kind of improve the overall street grid so that it makes more sense moving through it? Bicycle connections between any new development and the metro parks would be a valuable thing to look for. A mixture of uses, so not fully retail, but this mixture of retail, residential, and office. What retail that is developed there, there's a strategic advantage to having as much visibility as possible on 57, and also some of the big box tenants with the maximum visibility, especially through signage from I-90 and the Turnpike. Okay. We'll stick around. My colleagues, Matt, Kristen, and Jeff, will be at the tables up front, the downtown table, the Cleveland Street table in the middle, and then the Midway area at the end. So if you have specific things you want to tell us, if you have anything you've noted on these forms, please make sure and leave them either with us or at the back table, because we're really interested in your comments. And then the dates, as the mayor said, for the March meetings will be set shortly, and so we'll come back and talk about both the implementation on the infrastructure side and then the really more detailed economic development strategy.
Thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate it. Again, Terry and her staff will be here to have further dialogue, to answer any questions, and we're divided into different areas up here. So come on up and feel free to get some additional information and talk with some more thoughts and help them come back to the March session, because I think it is going to be very telling in terms of getting to that next level of implementation. And you're absolutely right. It's not going to be really good if we don't actually do it. So.
Why do I have to do all the raking?
Because I'm old, and I said so, and you're closer to the ground.
Shouldn't I be out embracing my youth while I'm still young enough to enjoy it or something?
You should be embracing this rake before it embraces you.
Man, next summer I'm going to one of those reach and rise camps. I guess I'll go get a garbage bag and start picking some of this stuff up.
No, hang on. You don't use a garbage bag for that. Use one of these. They're paper. That's what you're supposed to use for grass and leaves.
Why? What's the difference? They all go to the same place.
No, that's not true. We put grass and leaves in paper bags and take them to the compost facility on Chestnut Street. The bag is made of paper, so it will break down and compost, just like the stuff inside of it. That's just good old-fashioned science.
Oh, so is that what you mean when you say you're gonna drag the old bag out to sea all the time? See for Chestnut?
Yep.
Wouldn't it be easier just to throw it away with the rest of the trash?
It would be easier, but it also would be wrong. When grass decays, it creates these gases that are no good for anyone, and all it does is take up space.
Like you after Thanksgiving dinner?
Don't sass me. When you compost it, you turn it something useful. Fertilize it. It lets us put stuff we don't need anymore to good use instead of just throwing it away. That's just common sense.
All right, whatever. Hooray for science. Can I stuff some of these branches in here too?
No, those you bundle up and put on the curb for the city. They have a chipper truck that comes around and grinds it all up.
All right, got it. Leaves and grass go in a paper bag, and branches get bundled onto the curb. If I finish that, can I do something else?
Sure.
Cool.
You can wash my car.
Hey, Ricky, hold on. Wait up.
Oh, hey, Rodney, what's going on?
Well, I was thinking if you're going by the river, maybe you could take this tire.
The river, what are you talking about?
The river? If you take tires and other stuff they don't take in the normal trash down by the river, it magically disappears.
You're not serious right now.
Magic!
First of all, if you take the stuff down to the river to get rid of it, the only thing that's going to magically disappear is money from your wallet.
And that's if you're lucky and they don't just haul you off to jail. Ohio Revised Code says that you can be fined up to 25 grand and spend 2 to 4 years in jail for dumping scrap tires illegally.
For what? A couple of tires? Come on.
Tires, paint cans, household waste like bug spray, cleaners, fluorescent bulbs, e-scrap. It all has to be disposed of properly for safety's sake. They're not trying to make more work for you, it's just that it's not good for us and the environment. Think about it like this. They decided that this stuff is so unsafe it can't be kept with the other garbage.
Oh, I didn't know that garbage was so picky about the company it kept.
If you get rid of this in a landfill, it's going to eventually end up in the water table. So it'll be in the food you eat and the water you drink. You might as well take this tire, put it in a blender, and drink it.
So what'd you call that? A Michelin julep? No, wait. A gargarita.
Are you done? Because if you're done, we can take this and I'll show you where it actually goes.
Yeah, I'm kidding. Where do we gotta go?
You take this to the Lorain County Solid Waste Collection Center, 540 South Abbey in Elyria. They don't charge you anything, but you do have to get the stuff there yourself. So put your tire in and we'll take you down and I'll show you how to get rid of this stuff safely. There's no magic involved, but they will make your hazardous waste disappear.
No magic at all?
Mostly science, I think.
Science! Eh, it worked.
I'm turning on the radio.